we're going to solve these quadratics by factoring. Now starting with number 1, we can't simplify it any further. So what we can do, if we call this A and that's a 1, B, C, and A times C is 30 and B is positive 11, we've got to find two numbers that multiply to give positive 30 and add to give positive 11. So let's try 2 and 15. That's not going to work. 5 times 6 is 30, 5 plus 6 is 11. So that's actually the numbers you're chasing. We just go ahead and put a 5 and a 6 in. We don't have to do anything else here because there's a 1 in front of the x. So we just go ahead and write x plus 5 times x plus 6 equals 0. So that's your factor of this quadratic. Now using the null factor rule, either this equals 0 or this equals 0 to make this true. So x equals negative 5 or x equals negative 6. Okay, looking at part 2, there's no way of simplifying that any further, so we go ahead straight away, multiply A times C. Again, A is 1, B, C. So A times C is negative 54 and B is negative 3. So we need to find two numbers that multiply to give negative 54 and add to give negative 3. So let's try 2 times 27 is 54, but there's no way that's going to work. Now remember, to get a negative when you add, the larger number will be a negative. Let's try 3 times 18, so that would be negative 18. That's not going to work when you add them. And 6 and negative 9. Now when you add them, you'll get negative 3. When you multiply them, you get negative 54. Go ahead and put 6 and negative 9 in here. And because there's a 1 in front here, there's nothing further to do there other than to write it in this form. So x plus 6 and x minus 9. So to solve for 0, using the null factor rule, either that is 0 or that is 0. So x equals negative 6 or x equals 9. Okay, part 3. Now we can simplify this more by dividing everything by 2. So we got x squared minus 4x minus 5 equals 0. Okay, so let's look at AC equals 1 times negative 5 is negative 5 and B is negative 4. So this one's pretty simple. It's just negative 5 and 1. So let's go ahead and put negative 5 in here and 1 in there. There's nothing more that needs to be done other than factoring it like so. Equals 0. So x equals 5 or x equals negative 1. Now part 4, again we can divide everything by 2 to start with. So we've got x squared minus 10x plus 21 equals 0. So let's go ahead and work out which are the factors. So we've got 21 and we have negative 10. So this one's simple again, it's negative 7 and negative 3. So that's basically x minus 7 times x minus 3 equals 0. So x equals 7 or x equals 3. For the next few quadratics, we're going to solve two different ways. A is going to be solving by factoring and B solved by completing the square. Okay, part A, we can't reduce that any further. So we go ahead and start doing this. We've got A, B, C. So this is AC, this is B. So we've got AC is 15 times 3, which is 45, positive, and B is a positive 14. So let's go ahead and use trial and error to try and work out what the two numbers are. So they multiply to give 45 and add to give positive 14. Let's try 3 and 15. That's not going to work. 9 times 5 is 45. 9 plus 5 is 14. So there are your factors. So we've got 9 and 5. However, because there's a 15 in front instead of a 1 in front, we need to go a step further. So what we do is we divide both of these by 15, and then we can factor these down, divide both by 3, so that's 3 and that's 5. and that's 1 and 3. Now, all we do is we say this bottom number is in front of the x, so 5x, and this is a positive 3 plus 3 times 3x plus 1. And that equals 0. And solving using the null factor, either that's 0 or that's 0, so 5x equals negative 3, x equals negative 3 on 5, or 3x equals negative 1, x equals negative 1 on 3. Now we're going to solve by completing the square. So what we do is 15x squared plus 14x plus 3. Now we need to divide everything by 15 equals 0. So we've got x squared plus 14 on 15x. Now let's add half of this value squared. So plus 7 on 15 squared. And let's say that equals 7 on 15 because we want them to cancel out. And don't forget, we're bringing this 3 on 15 over to be a negative, so 3 minus 3 on 15. So we've got, this is a perfect square now, x plus 7 on 15 squared equals 49 on 15 squared minus 3 15s are 45, so minus 45 on 15 squared. So x plus 7 on 15 squared is equal to 4 on 15 squared. Square rooting both sides, we get x plus 7 on 15 is equal to plus or minus 2 on 15. So bringing this over, we've got x equals negative 7 on 15 plus 2 on 15, which equals negative 5 on 15 equals negative 1 on 3, or x equals negative 7 on 15 minus 2 on 15 equals negative 9 on 15, and that equals negative 3 on 5, and that is the same as what we get over here. Let's look at number 6, so solving by factoring. So we can't break this down any further. So what we're going to do is we are going to set up our A, C and B. So this is A, B and C. So AC is 14 times negative 3, which is negative 42, and B is negative 19. So two numbers multiplied to give negative 42 and add to give negative 19. So let's try negative 7 and 6. That's not going to work. Let's try negative 21 and 2. So that's actually the correct answer. So we put negative 21 and 2 in there. Now because the coefficient A is not equal to 1, we now have to go an extra step and we divide each of these by 14 to turn them into a fraction. And then we break them down into the lowest common denominators. So these both can be divided by 7. So this is 3 and 2. And this can be divided by 2. Okay, so now when we look at this, this is what's in front of the x value. And that's what we add. So we've got 2x minus 3. Don't forget this is a negative. Times 7x plus 1, and that equals 0. So now we can go ahead and solve using the null factor rule. So either that is 0 or that is 0. So x equals 3 on 2, or x equals negative 1 on 7. Now I'm going to show you the same one solving completing the square. Obviously you wouldn't do this completing the square because this is way more simple in this case. It's easier to factor. So straight away we need to divide everything by 14 to get a 1 out the front of the x squared. So we've got 14 on 14x squared minus 19 on 14x minus 3 on 14 equals 0. So we've got x squared minus 19 on 14, x. We need to divide this coefficient b by 2 and then square it and add it and then subtract it. So we've got plus 19 on 28 because we're dividing by 2, and that's squared, and then it's minus 19 on 28 squared minus 3 on 14 equals 0. Remember, these would normally cancel out to 0, but by adding them in, we turn this into a perfect square. So we've got x minus 19 on 28 all squared is equal to, let's bring these over the other side, so they both come over as positive. So it's 19 on 28 squared plus 3 on 14. So we need to get these with the same common denominator so we can add them. So x minus 19 on 28 all squared is equal to 361 on 784 plus 168 on 784. And that equals 529 on 784. So square rooting both sides, we get x minus 19 on 28 is equal to the square root of 529 on the square root of 784, and that equals 23 on 28, and that's a plus or minus because a negative times negative can be a positive. So x is equal to 23 on 28 plus 19 on 28 equals 42 on 28, and that breaks down to 3 on 2, or x equals negative 23 on 28 minus plus 19 on 28, which equals negative 4 on 28, and that breaks down to negative 1 on 7. So if you just look up here again, we have got the same answers, just a much longer process, which is why you wouldn't use it if you can factor. Okay, let's move on to 7 to solve by factoring. Set up our AC and our B. So AC is 15 by 21, which is 315, and it's a positive, and then B is negative 44. So we need to go through and work out two numbers that multiplied to give 315 and they add to give negative 44. So they're going to have to both be negatives because negative times negative will give you a positive. So let's try negative 15 and negative 21. And that's not going to work. Let's try negative 5 and negative 63, negative 7 and negative 45, no, negative 3 and negative 105, no, negative 9 and negative 35. Now I've just trial and error, I've divided 315 by different numbers less than 10 until I've found one that works. So this is what works. So we go ahead and put negative 9 and negative 35 in here. Now that's not as far as we go with this because we need to divide by the coefficient in front of the x squared. Let's go ahead and divide by 15 on both of these numbers, and then we break it down into its lowest common form. And don't forget these are negatives. So now we can go ahead and factor, remembering this is the number in front of the first x, and then it's subtracting by 3, and then we've got 3x minus 7. And that equals 0. And that will give, using the null factor, so that equals 0 or that equals 0. We get x equals 3 on 5 or x equals 7 on 3. Let's look at the same quadratic, only we're going to solve by completing the square. So we've got to divide everything by 15 to get x squared minus 44 on 15, x, plus 21 on 15 equals 0. Now we're going to add and subtract the square of half the b value, so x squared minus 44 on 15 x plus 22 on 15 squared. I'm going to take that over as well, so we've got to have 22 on 15 squared on this side, and we take this over to be negative 21 on 15. So again, that's the perfect square of x minus 22 on 15 squared, and that equals 22 squared, which is 484 on 15 squared, minus 315 on 15 squared. So x minus 22 on 15 all squared is equal to 169 on 15 squared. Now we take the square root of both sides, and that leaves us with plus or minus 13 on 15. So bring this over to be a plus, so we've got x equals 22 on 15 plus 13 on 15, which equals 35 on 15, so that's 7 on 3. Or x equals 22 on 15 minus 13 on 15, which equals 9 on 15, and that's 3 on 5. So if you have a look over here, they are the same answers. Okay, number 8, we can't reduce this any further, so we go straight ahead and do the A, C and B. So AC is negative 300. And b is negative 13. So using trial and error, we try and find the two numbers. So we try negative 30 and 10. It's got to be, larger one's got to be negative to get the negative b value. Now that's not going to work. Let's try, so negative 150 and 2 is obviously not going to work. Negative 50 and 6, no. Negative 25 and 12, yes. So we go ahead and put negative 25 and 12 in here, but that's not it because we've still got a 15 at the front, so we need to divide it by that. And then we break it down to its lowest common denominator, so that's negative 5 and 3 is 4 and 5. So we end up with 3x minus 5 times 5x plus 4. So using the null factor, x equals 5 on 3 or x equals negative 4 on 5. Okay, let's go ahead and complete the square for the same equation. Now first of all, we've got to divide everything by 15 so that we've just got a coefficient of 1 in front of the x squared. So it's x squared minus 13 on 15x minus 20 on 15 equals 0. I want to bring this over, and we also want to add and subtract the square of half of the b value. So let's go ahead and do that. So we've got plus 13 on 30, because that's half of this value, squared. And we've got to put the same value on the other side to cancel it out because it doesn't belong in the equation. And then we've got the 20 on 15 that comes across as a positive. So that is basically on the left hand side we've got x minus 13 on 30 all squared, and that equals, when you arrange the same common denominator, we've got 1200 plus 169 all on 900. And that equals 1369 on 900. So taking the square root of both sides, we have x minus 13 on 30 is equal to the square root of 1369 divided by the square root of 900, which equals plus or minus 37 on 30. So then solving for x by bringing this over to plus, we've got x is equal to 13 on 30 plus 37 on 30, or x equals 13 on 30 minus 37 on 30. So x equals 50 on 30, and the 10s simply factor out, so leave 5 on 3, or x equals negative 24 on 30, which equals negative 4 on 5. Now if we go over here, we can see we've got the same answer. Okay, part 9a, solved by factoring. So let's go ahead and do our AC and our B. So we've got 6 times negative 15 is negative 90, and B is negative 27. So let's try and work out numbers. So we've got 3 times negative 30. Does that work? Yes, because 3 minus 30 is also, or 3 plus negative 30 is also negative 27. So there are our numbers. That was simple. Now we need to divide both sides by 6 because of this value up here. And then we break it down. So we've got 1 on 2 and we've got 5 on 1. So now we've got in brackets 2x plus 1 times 1x, and that's meant to be a minus there, minus 5. Using the null factor law, that gives us x equals negative a half, or x equals 5. Okay, part B, solved by completing the square. What I should have realised earlier is you can divide all these values by 3. So we've got 2x squared minus 9x minus 5 equals 0. And then we've got to divide it all by 2 to get the coefficient in front of the x squared to be equal to 1. So we've got x squared minus 9 on 2x minus 5 on 2 equals 0. Bring this over to add. And then we're going to also add and subtract the square of half the b value. So we've got x squared minus 9 on 2x plus 9 on 4, because that's half the b value, all squared. And then we've got to add the same to the other side to cancel it. And then we've got the 5 on 2 that comes across here. So we've got x minus 9 on 4 all squared is equal to 81 on 16 plus 5 on 2. So let's get the same common denominator. That equals 121 on 16. So square rooting both sides, we've got x minus 9 on 4 equals plus or minus 11 on 4. Now bring this across, we've got x equals 9 on 4 plus 11 on 4, which equals 20 on 4, or equals 5. Or we've got x equals 9 on 4 minus 11 on 4 equals negative 2 on 4 equals negative a half. Now if we go up and have a look, we've got the exact same value as we worked out when we factored it. Okay, let's do the last one. So let's get the AC and B. Now AC is negative 3 times 15, which is negative 45. B is negative 4. Okay, using trial and error, we could try negative 15 and 3. That's not it. Negative 9 times 5 is 45. They add to give negative 4, so that's the one. So let's put them in here. And then because we've got a 15 there, we've got to divide both sides by 15. And then let's break it down to its lowest common denominator. So we've simply got 5x minus 3 times 3x plus 1 equals 0. So using the null factor, we have x equals 3 on 5, or x equals negative 1 on 3. Okay, let's complete the square. So we've got to divide everything by 15. So we've got x squared minus 4 on 15, x minus 3 on 15 equals 0. We bring this over and we add and subtract the square of half this b value. So we've got x squared minus 4 on 15x plus 2 on 15, so I've divided the 4 by 2, and that's squared, equals 2 on 15, because we've got to cancel that out, plus 3 on 15. So on the left side we've got x minus 2 on 15 squared is equal to 4 on 225 plus 45 on 225. So I've just multiplied top and bottom by 15 to get this, and that equals 49 on 225. Now we take the square root of both sides, which gives x minus 2 on 15 equals plus or minus 7 on 15. Bring this over to add. We've got x equals 2 on 15 plus 7 on 15, which equals 9 on 15. Divide both by 3, that's 3 on 5. Or x equals 2 on 15 minus 7 on 15, which is negative 5 on 15 equals negative 1 on 3. We're just going to have a look up here and we've got the same answer.